Welcome to the final installment of Preservation Connecticut's Spring 2021 series talking about preservation, our noontime chats about everything preservation. I'm Jane Montanaro, Executive Director of Preservation Connecticut, and I'm delighted to be your host as we have the opportunity to chat with Sarah Marsom, a nationally recognized heritage consultant who will help us expand our preservation toolkit, our understanding of who is a preservationist, and show us how we can empower each other for the future of our communities and demonstrate that preservation is fun. But before I hand the controls over to Sarah, let me give you a brief intro into Preservation Connecticut. Preservation Connecticut is the statewide, private, nonprofit historic preservation organization founded in 1975 by a special act of the Connecticut General Assembly as the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation, to preserve, protect, and promote the buildings, sites, and landscapes that contribute to the heritage and vitality of Connecticut's communities. We are statutory partners with the State Historic Preservation Office, and I am proud to say that for over 4 decades, we have successfully championed the protection of remarkable community assets all over the state by leveraging funding, advocating, forming partnerships, and promoting stewardship. Our office is on Whitney Avenue in Hamden, pictured here. It's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's the Eli Whitney boarding house built in 1827 to house workers for Eli Whitney's gun factory, and it has served as our headquarters since 1989. Preservation Connecticut has a staff of 8 preservation professionals and a board of 21 preservationists from around the state. Staff listed here are always available to assist with inquiries. Christopher Wiegren is our Deputy Director. Contact Chris for information on historic preservation easements, our bi-monthly magazine, Connecticut Preservation News, our newly launched Olmsted in Connecticut Landscape Survey Project, and to arrange book talks for his recently published book, Connecticut Architecture, Stories of 100 Places. Renee Trebert, Making Places and Preservation Services Manager. Please contact Renee for information on redevelopment of historic industrial sites and tax credit applications. Jordan Sorensen is our Development and Special Projects Project Manager. Jordan manages our communications and outreach to members through social media and email, receives and monitors demolition notices from municipalities, and prepares historic tax credit applications and nominations to State and National Register of Historic Places. Kristen Hopewood, our Development Assistant, manages all of the inquiries that come through our website, provides member services, arranges special events, and is the editor of our Historic Properties Exchange, a free listing of threatened historic properties. And finally, our team of circuit riders, Brad Scheid, Mike Farino, and Stacy Vero, provide immediate boots on the ground service to homeowners, developers, municipal leaders, nonprofit organizations and museums, historic district commissions, and more, with an array of preservation technical assistance, including community organizing, prioritizing maintenance and repairs, historic designations, and funding. These chats have served as a meaningful way for us to continue our mission during the pandemic. We've been able to connect with the public and hear what's on your mind. Please feel free to use the chat feature to ask questions directly at the end of the presentation, or contact us afterwards for a call or a site visit. So with that, I'm excited to hand the program over to today's guest, Sarah Marsom. So welcome, Sarah, and I will stop my screen sharing so you can go ahead and share.
Okay. So, hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Marsom. I'm a heritage resource consultant based in Columbus, Ohio. And I have to fully confess that up until a couple years ago, I felt insecure about doing preservation as fun work. I thought that people weren't taking me seriously. I thought that all they thought I did was arts and crafts and partied in vacant buildings. And I'm like, no, but this is serious work, because connecting people to preservation is vital for the relevance of the movement. So while a lot of what I'm going to show you today has a strong level of whimsy, I hope you can recognize the value that it has. And once again, connecting people to place, empowering them, and helping them move beyond the standard walking tour. You know, we got to connect to people in a wide variety of ways. So I love to start by assessing the types of strategies that we currently use in preservation. And we frequently try to educate people on how to be advocates for the past, you know, teach people how to go to a architectural review board meeting, to teach people to lobby for historic tax credits. And if you've been in one of those lectures, you know, it can get a little dry. So how about consider having a workshop at a local letterpress or printing shop, and you can design preservation themed postcards. People get to learn the tradition of letterpress. And then at the end of these workshops that I've facilitated, you know, we all gather together and we actively write postcards to advocate for a cause that matters to us. And we have stamps ready so they can go right in the mail to our state or federal legislators. So again, you know, let's consider how we can put a little bit of spin on our existing activities to just make them a little different, a little bit more fun. You know, some people who've come to these workshops just want to make some preservation themed postcards, fine, but they also have to sit through and learn a bit about how we do proper advocacy strategies. Or we have to reconsider our audiences for activities. A lot of hands-on workshops that I see frequently, you know, they're targeted to DIYers, to the person who's wanting to potentially restore windows for their homes. But that's leaving out a huge swath of potential people who may just want to get dirty, and getting dirty is fun for them. And this could be middle schoolers who they get dirty as a service project. And these photos are not staged. Those were very happy children who had never gotten that dirty before in their lives, but they felt really fulfilled learning about how the patterns are designed, clean the bricks. And if you've ever had middle schoolers help out with a hands-on project, it goes twice as fast as when you do it with adults. So it's even fun for you as a facilitator to get out of there early. But this hands-on workshop program, it's honestly one of my favorite projects that I ever did, because it was for the German Village Society in Columbus, Ohio, which has had local architectural review since 1960, and that's when the nonprofit that I worked for at the time was founded. So by the 1980s, though, this nonprofit had advocated for buildings, and now they were on infrastructure. So this zany couple, Fred and Howard, had actually planted a tree in one of the Brick Street potholes as a way to get the city's attention to fix them. The city was like, oh, we're not going to deal with these jokers. So they came out to try and pave it, but when they showed up, people in the neighborhood were relaying the brick streets themselves. So, you know, relaying these brick sidewalks, it was a fun homage to the past. Participants got funny shirts that had, they were a cartoon reference to the past. Like, you know, it's not just about our activity. You know, I may do fun things, but all of these fun things require research so that we're cultivating meaningful connections. So we want to figure out all the different ways we can connect past to present. And it also can just be as simple as how you say thank you. As a part of the Young Ohio Preservationists, we advocated for a couple of years to try and save the Holy Rosary Church and School. If you want to invest in Ohio, it's currently for sale for over $1 million. But during these litter cleanups, you know, we wanted to figure out a way to thank people beyond the nice tour inside the facilities. So one of our board members' boyfriends, for fun, he designed and 3D printed these little pins for us. So everybody got a pin that was based on the tile design on the buildings. So, you know, a nice little simple reminder of someone's positive impact that they had on this historic congregation. Or basically every preservation organization has a board, but how many of them have high school boards? The wonderful Lindsay Dotson up in Charlevoix, Michigan, she has established at every single Main Street program that she's worked at a high school board. And, you know, I've I'm good friends with her. I've given presentations with her, and a lot of what we've heard is they're like, oh, is it worth the time with high schoolers? They're just going to move away for college anyways. Well, yes, because you want those high schoolers to move back after college to beat brain drain, but also high schoolers have great opinions. They've got great ideas, and they have lots of energy. So in this image, you can see a finished picture of what Hoop Skirt Alley looks like. Before Hoop Skirt Alley, before the high schoolers selected this as their public improvement project, it was just, you know, a pass-through place. It's not a place where you'd want to spend time, even though it has beautiful views of Lake Michigan. It was just a cut through to a parking lot. So the high schoolers worked with a local architect, and they came up with the design. They helped put together a rendering, and they did all of the fundraising to make this possible. The high schoolers were able to raise over $10,000 to $15,000 to make this possible, and then they got a matching grant to install the bench seating, to install some images of historic Charlevoix, to install oversized games. And I visited this past winter, and even during winter, it's still a really desirable place to have outdoor time because of the way it was designed. So the high schoolers did a great job at installing a multi-season space that encourages relaxation or play. And we can even just reconsider the ways we use our official documents. This is a screenshot of a part of a architectural survey form that was filled out by Barry Grass. Barry Grass does creative writing and poetry, a whole myriad of things. And I'll make sure when I'm done talking to share a link to the full piece. So Barry utilized this architectural inventory form to fill it out for her or their emotional reflections of their childhood home. And if you read through the piece, you know, even like historic use, if you've known horror and refuge, it was wet with booze breath, you know, that's not what we typically see on an inventory form. So, you know, a little bit of creativity and, you know, our constructs that we've created, they have value to a certain extent. Maybe they need some updates, but they also can create really unique themes and constructs for a creative vision. So again, one of my favorite projects is, I'm showing you pillows and you're like, what do pillows have to do with buildings? So I partnered with Spoonflower, which is a textile production company based in North Carolina, but they do international work. And there are thousands upon thousands of designers there. So I partnered with them to do a desert modernism challenge in preparation for a workshop that I was going to do with Modern Phoenix. So we wanted to see how all of these different designers could interpret what desert modern means, what mid-century modern architecture and design can mean to them. And this is just 3 of the over 500 submissions. Just wonderful designs that showcase a variety of perspectives of what that style means to them. And, you know, this was a great way to introduce the mid-century modern movement to a variety of people who may not have been familiar. So why were we wanting pillow designs from people? Well, we had a vacant 1960 mall that we needed to activate. You know, it's sometimes hard to sell people on redevelopment possibilities, right? Not everybody can see the preservationist vision. So why don't we occasionally do pop-ups in the spaces? So the developer for this mall, he wanted to do a maker space, but he wasn't quite sure it would work in one of the empty storefronts. So what we did is we did a pop-up sewing workshop where people learned about the history of women in mid-century modern design, Florence Knoll, you know, Ray Eames, to them, to the lesser known like Ruth Adler Cheney, and how they influenced textile design in the making of modern home. And then sewing is a traditional skill of women, especially in the mid-century modern era. So everybody got to learn how to make a pillow. It was fun. We had everybody from high schoolers to seniors. We had all genders represented. You know, it was a range of people. And then after we sewed our pillows, we went and watched the Doris Day and Rock Hudson movie, Pillow Talk, in the atrium. So this was a great proof of concept that yes, okay, there's enough outlets right now to make this feasible for X number of electronic machines. It has enough space so that X number of people can comfortably utilize and make in here. So it really was a great proof of concept for the developer to see if or if not this space would work as is, or if it needed modifications. And we even had a visit from Phoenix's mayor, Kate Gallego, at the time, and she had a ton of fun helping us stuff some pillows. So again, just thinking about how we bring visions to life in a little bit different way. You know, this project, it seems a little wild. We start with a company who's going to donate us fabric, and then it leads to the workshop in person. But this is just expanding our partnerships and then expanding our potential friends for preservation. This company had never previously supported a preservation project before, but this was their first time, and they have done it subsequently since then. So part of being creative is creatively creating new friendships. Coloring books are fairly ubiquitous at this point, right? There's plenty of adult ones, there's plenty of youth ones. It's trying to figure out what makes the most sense for your audience. You know, you don't want hyper detailed things for a smaller child, and you don't want anything too basic for adults. But how about, let's consider again the process of making our coloring book. This example for German Village, instead of just hiring an artist to do all of the designs, I partnered with an architecture firm, and we had a wonderful noontime workshop where the architects got to learn about the historic district and the commission process, and all of them got to draw a bit of the neighborhood. So this was entirely created by an architecture firm, or the illustrations were, and then afterward I was able to go back and add text easily, but it creates more of a collaborative project. And then, then the architects want to buy the coloring book. And then eventually, we got a grant to pay for the printing, and that allowed us to give free coloring books to every third grader who went on a tour with us that year, which was really nice. But I've done other coloring book workshops where anybody can come and design a building or use tracing paper if they don't feel confident in their drawing skills. It's not just about our end results when we're thinking creatively, it's about our larger vision. And how we tell these stories comes in a variety of ways. So the coloring book, it's not just about coloring, it has architectural styles there, and there's even a scavenger hunt tucked in there. So kids can bring it with their parents and do a scavenger hunt. But for more of an adult geared project, the past few years I've partnered with Indo, which is an interior storm window company, to create zines. Zines were wildly popular in the 1990s. If you're a fan of Wright, girl music, punk music, like zines, all the rage. Zines are basically an informal publication that allow you to communicate whatever your idea is, and they're typically crowdsourced. So as a way to break away from the stereotypical academic writing that we see in preservation, we've created a zine so that preservationists could communicate in a variety of ways, but not feel restricted to the verbiage that we are trained in. So these themes have varied each year, but the submissions have ranged from people doing illustrations, people writing poetry, people writing, short anecdotal narratives about their connection to place. And it's been really nice to see this other side of primarily professional preservationists, but we're actually getting creative writers submitting. We're getting new audiences submitting to be in these zines because of the interest in either the themes or wanting to see that digital publication be released. And paper versions of these zines are created when we can have in-person conferences. But the point is, like, a zine is something anybody can do. And I've given hour-long workshops solely on how to create a zine, so I won't go too in-depth with them. But you don't need to be formally published. Anybody who has a printer can make them. And if you crowdsource them around a theme, you get really, really wonderful stories about whatever you've selected. You can also consider, again, digital publications. It doesn't cost anything. Sydney Landers is a recent graduate from the University of Texas Austin Preservation Program. And as a part of one of her classes, she created a graphic novel, all by herself. It's about 40, 45 pages, something along those lines. It's about the history of the preservation movement. So it fuses her writing, it fuses her illustration. It's something entirely different. And if you like graphic novels, there's already been one written about Robert Moses. There are urbanism, preservation themed graphic novels out there. And I'll make sure to share a link so you all can read this afterwards. So, you know, we can communicate in a whole range of ways. And that's what I really am just trying to impart on you all, is that preservation communication, well, I love a good walking tour. Let's be honest, our walking tours reach a limited audience. So how do we reach all those people in our communities that we're not connecting? We already have great research. We already have great resources. So how do we creatively utilize our existing assets and our existing skills in new and different ways? And not everything's going to be a success. Feel free to ask me questions about how I've messed up. I'm happy to share those stories. But it's the point that we need to be trying, and then our trying can lead to new funding, lead to new friends, and lead to really interesting and different strategies. So like I said, I love a good tour. And last year, a lot of us were probably going around and doing self-guided tours, right? Whether it's just you walking around your neighborhood, admiring your neighbor's house, or maybe you got a chance to download one of the digital self-guided tours that many of our groups have. So I was, a little bored last year, and I was sewing a lot. So I had an excess of these banners and pennants that I'd been creating for no other reason other than I just wanted a creative outlet as I was thinking through life during the pandemic. So how do I want to utilize these? So during Preservation Month last year, I decided to hop on a local initiative by a craft group called Hand Make My Day CBUS. And their initiative was artists from around the community were hiding art just in different places, posting pictures on social media, and then you could go and find that piece of art. And it was really fun. I went and got a little painting during it. So I decided to use it as a way to have it be a scavenger hunt to historic places, of course. So you can see in these two examples, one of them, it's on a bike rack across from one of the oldest family-owned businesses that tells the story of Asian immigration in Columbus. Another one is a historic tax credit project. So it told the history of the trolley barn, and then also showed that construction was about to start. And this was so much fun. I made new friends online through it. People got to learn histories they didn't expect. And as you can see from the art pieces, they have nothing to do with preservation whatsoever, just happy springtime stuff. So, it's, even as we consider things, this is fairly indirect to preservation, but it's still a storytelling strategy if you want to try something different. So I really started to explore with out-of-the-box preservation, I guess, with the Tiny Jane Jacobs project. In 2016, I was heading down to Houston for the National Trust for Historic Preservation Conference, and Houston notoriously lacks zoning. Preservationists down there are frequently sending out an SOS signal. It's just rough and tumble area, but it has lots of great architecture and art down there. And I just thought how funny it would be if I had Jane Jacobs, who wrote The Death and Life of Great American Cities, who's arguably one of the founders of the modern preservation movement through her advocacy efforts to save Greenwich Village and other communities during urban renewal. So I just thought Jane would have some feelings on zoning and the lack of it. So I took this little hand-stitched doll. It's not like she's even the prettiest thing that I've ever made. So I took Jane. She explored the city with me, visited the beer can house, saw those great little tile street signs. And I had people at the conference asking me, oh, well, I want a Tiny Jane. And I was like, oh, well, if I hand-stitched every single one of these dolls, that would cost an arm and a leg. So maybe let's not do that. What's the right solution for this problem? So I partnered with illustrator Shannon May, who is a artistic director for Google, lifelong friend of mine, and she designed the Tiny Jane Jacobs that is sold today. And Tiny Jane has been a wonderful boost of confidence for me as someone who's a creator, but also it's been such a fun way to connect to people that I never would have in other ways. So when Tiny Jane launched in early 2017, she was also a fun way for me to fundraise. So I raised money from doll sales to help support emerging professionals to attend the National Trust Conference at that time. And as you can see from the images, Tiny Jane has been used by the Cleveland Public Library as part of storytelling time. The image on the right is, I got it last week. This young girl alongside her 90-year-old neighbor and her mom sewed all of those dolls as a way to have a little takeaway as a part of a urban planning class in her second grade class. And so happy. But like what I learned from this, you know, this is a little silly. The pictures that I'm showing mostly have kids in them, but to be honest, my target demographic is millennial women. That's the majority of who buys the dolls, people without kids, just because they like having a Tiny Jane on their shelves. But what I've learned through this creative endeavor is, you know, I'll have her sticking out of my backpack or whatever, is that a lot of preservationists don't know who Jane Jacobs is. And I consider Jane Jacobs fairly fundamental to the field. So it's really been a great way for me to open up opportunities for impromptu conversations on the history of preservation that may have never occurred. So, you know, having something just fun and easy to ice break is a great way to open up doors to conversations. And the success of Tiny Jane led to me launching Tiny I Am Pay after the architect in 2019. So I Am Pay is a way to tell stories about the Asian Exclusion Act. I Am Pay immigrated to America during that, which a lot of people don't realize. And he also later on in his career donated funds from his Pritzker Prize to send budding Asian architects to America to study. So really great guy. And in that image, you can see a photo of one of the museums that he designed. I've had a number of museums purchase I Am Pay, and during the pandemic, they utilized it as a fun social media tool. So it's like I Am Pay was exploring the galleries when nobody else was there. So, you know, it's kind of like Flat Stanley, but a little bit different. And I did not grow up with Flat Stanley, so the references I only learned about later. So Tiny Jane and Tiny I Am Pay celebrate people, but a lot of preservation work is tied to celebrating buildings, right? So around the 50th anniversary of the I Am Pay designed Cleo Rogers Memorial Library, I partnered with the Columbus Area Arts Council to do programming for both youth and adults with a variety of strategies to connect them to the building in ways they hadn't previously. So that included a workshop with middle schoolers, and the middle schoolers got to replace the iconic Henry Moore sculpture, which stands in front of the I Am Pay building. They got to design what they would like to see as public art in front. And, you know, in these examples, you can see we have a teapot, we have a nice fountain. But what I was fascinated with is unintentionally, these students were revealing some of the inefficiencies in the library. A number of them actually designed open signs because they were like, I can't ever tell the library's open. There are other students that designed outdoor seating spaces, which again, the library, other than if you want to sit on the stairs, like there's no outdoor seating. So youth and, you know, just creative exercise to celebrate the library actually showed ways that it could potentially be improved. No disrespect to I Am Pay, but, you know, there's always room for improvement as we consider the opportunities to expand and connect our buildings. So throughout last year, which was the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, acknowledging that not all women or all men or individuals could vote until the 1970s, which is after the Voting Rights Act, I really connected to the banners that were a part of the advocacy for the suffrage movement. And so I partnered with Spoonflower again. They donated fabric, and I got to have one in-person workshop before the pandemic, which gets my goat, obviously. But, you know, these workshops were not just a way to teach people how to creatively make something through sewing. It was a way to teach them about how these suffragists utilize specific colors for specific reasons. They utilize specific verbiage for specific reasons. You know, this was a very organized and intentional marketing campaign that wasn't just in America. It's been shown that the American suffragists were communicating with the UK and back and forth about best ways to advocate for the right to vote. So the participants of this were encouraged to create something that would reflect, you know, something that motivates them, something that advocates for something they believe in today, something else entirely. And obviously some participants chose to use humor. The young girls on the right who are a part of a virtual workshop with Better Days 2020, they liked using the state flower and then just encouraging people to vote. You know, people took this in all types of directions that I couldn't expect. One of my favorites was actually this tiny little pennant that was created that said vote, that someone who was moving out of their apartment, they wanted to leave just like a tiny little bit of encouragement for somebody to vote when they left. So this turned into public art. It turned into just like private empowerment. And it connected a variety of people to the voting rights advocacy efforts through the suffrage movement and beyond, to help us understand where we stood during an election year or where we need to go in terms of representation of women in public office today. And I honestly just had so much fun. This happened again. So some people may call this public history. I call it preservation because I reference places where suffragists were in every single event. But these types of workshops were done with everything from arts nonprofits to histories to political action committees. There were about 5 different types of categories of organizations I did these for. So again, if we're doing preservation right, if we're doing it creatively and in fun ways, it's not just our standard audience who wants to participate. It's not just our standard audience who wants to support. And we can celebrate and have fun in just so many ways, whether it's permanent or maybe it's very temporary, like this 150th anniversary of Frank Lloyd Wright. This is the Gladys and David Wright House in Arizona. They commissioned a balloon artist to just cover the building, something fun. It was a public engagement strategy. In Michigan, another great temporary example is Flower House, which was in Detroit, Michigan a few years ago. That was a building slated for demolition. So the artist chose to celebrate the life of the building by installing flowers in all the different rooms of the house. It was open to the public with tickets. And it was a fundraiser for the community to help prevent further demolitions. So when we consider celebrations, it's not just the life of the building or the history that happened, it's also potentially using an unconventional way to honor what stood there and may not exist any longer or may not exist presently. The nonprofit Preserve East New York, which is helmed by Zumalina Then, they have held building funerals using large balloons that spell out the names of buildings. You know, we can use creative strategies for positive and negative. And our interventions don't just have to be physical. Liftwork is an arts firm that is based in Chicago. They do work all over the country. And here's one of their wonderful projection installations of the Farnsworth House, the Mies van der Rohe design structure that's just outside of Chicago. So again, things like this does not touch the building in any way. This was just for a one weekend art performance. So it doesn't cause any harm, but it makes you reconsider the architecture in wild ways that you may never have before. In Cincinnati, projection and light art has turned into an annual festival. Cincinnati Music Hall is on the left. That's a National Historic Landmark. I have never seen a National Historic Landmark look like that, but I love it. It's very Mary Blair inspired. Or you can see the historic church in the center with the projection. These do not cause any harm to buildings. They're temporary, and this was supposed to be a one-off event. It was so popular, it turned into an annual thing down in Cincinnati. And if you go to San Antonio, one of their oldest churches, if you, 3 or 4 days a week, does projection. And it's an evening activity. I think it lasts something along the lines of an hour, but they do projection of a variety of images created by an artist. And again, it's a different way to draw people to a historic place in a way that doesn't harm the buildings potentially. And then we can have more permanent modifications to buildings if we so desire. In Port Austin, Michigan, a very small town in the thumb, Port Austin has been activating barns, vacant barns that are just standing there in farm fields, connecting artists to different farmers who give the barn up for grabs. And so I find this lovely. Next time I'm up in middle of nowhere, Michigan, I will happily visit here. It's just simple reflections. It makes the building seem see-through. It's just something different, but it's permanent. And again, not everybody's a Barnigan, but this is a way to convince people to engage with the place in a new and a different way. There's bike tours that take you around to all the different barns in the area. There's a whole variety of activities around safely engaging with these barns and recognizing the agricultural history of the area. So a lot of the examples that I did provide are in more urban areas or like a main street community, but this is very rural area and they've had this wildly successful creative campaign. So I know I just dumped a lot of information on you all with a lot of potential ideas. So I will say that for me, I'm having my most fun in preservation when other people are feeling empowered and elevated, when they feel like they have an opportunity to have a voice at the table and that they just feel included. That to me is the most fun. And it started from when I was giving tours to youth and you finally see that sparkle in their eye when they understand why history is relevant to them. But it's not just relegated to youth, it's people of all ages. So this year I'm hosting a virtual event called Dismantle Preservation, where there's more than 30 presentations and all of the speakers are students and recent grads. And to me, I think nothing's more fun than elevating the voices of these people who don't typically get to speak at a professionals conference. So I'll share the link for that and a bunch of links for the things that I referenced in the chat. But I hope you'll consider it because it's really wonderful hearing what these emerging professionals are up to. And there's presentations, everything from a documentary screening that high schoolers created to how to preserve skateboard parks. It'll really push your preservation perspective in a variety of ways if their proposals are any indicator.
Thank you, Sarah. That's really fantastic. I just am so impressed with all the different work that you're doing, and it really is fun.
Staying busy and out of trouble.
Helping people be advocates and saving historic places and learning the importance of our shared heritage in a way that they don't perhaps even realize that they're doing this important work, and just really being engaging. I jotted lots of notes down, lot of great ideas for us to take away from this presentation.
Thank you. And it looks like we have one question in the chat about how do you encourage people to submit? Encouraging people to participate in a competition process like the Spoonflower Pillows or something more collaborative like the zines. It requires a lot of emails, if I'm being honest. Yes, the social media posts are really great. And I always encourage people, you don't just post an event once, you post things repeated, you have a digital promotion schedule for whatever you're doing, while recognizing that you should have a different voice on Instagram versus Twitter versus Facebook, because demographically you have different audiences. But the biggest successful response rate for me, at least, has come through emails, through newsletters, and then also targeted outreach where, for example, okay, we're wanting more submissions from students. Okay, I've emailed all the preservation programs, but who else is doing preservation work? Let's go to archaeologists next. Let's go to public history people next. It's just looking at all of our potential demographics and trying to reach out to them and build relationships with them, and partnering with people who, you know, they may not directly benefit from the project that you're doing, but you've built a relationship with them, so they're happy to share your event.
Sarah, I'm really intrigued by the high school board that you were talking about. Were these all students from the same high school? Were they from?
Yes. So Lindsay Dotson, what she has done is she partners with specific teachers. So, you know, like obviously history, but she's figured out a bunch of different teachers who encourage service projects, but then also partnering with like the Honors Society and the other existing organizations that are intended for our quote unquote high achievers. And she has them all agree to do 2-year terms. So they try and do the recruitment when people are juniors, so that it's a junior senior project. And that also aligns along with when teens typically have licenses and have a little bit more autonomy that doesn't rely on parents as much. And Charlevoix is a smaller community, so so what she does is every time she gets a cohort in, and I think that, you know, there is some staggering between juniors and seniors there, but she gives them a plate of options where she's like, okay, our downtown is lacking any pizzazz and say this area, this area, this area. Pick an area, and then what type of project would you like to do? She really tries to empower them to take the lead. So in that case, with the Hoop Skirt Alley, they chose to do some place activation, and that's what they wanted to do. And seriously, I visited it in person finally after a couple years, and it was really nice, and it was quality made, hold up through the seasons. It was clear that through some mentorship, these high schoolers had thought through a variety of engagement strategies.
Great, thank you. We can open up the floor. If anyone had a question, you can unmute yourself or raise your hand.
I have one. Sarah, do you come across people who kind of are, I don't know, for lack of a better word, kind of snobby or academic and don't really appreciate the work that you're doing?
Yes.
How do you get through to those people? That's what I'd like to know.
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I was sitting in these committees and these meetings where it felt like people were patting me on the head, like, oh, good for you, you did this thing. And it was quite condescending, if I'm being honest. And then I'd come and present to conferences, and I feel like people either get it or they're just like, huh? So what I have tried to really show people is the ways it connects to the more academic work. So for example, you created a National Register nomination. Wonderful, amazing. Do you just want it to languish on a shelf? Is that why you did all this research? Oh, no, that's not what you want. Okay, let's figure out how we can bring it to life. So for example, one consultant who did a multiple property group nomination for African-American civil rights. So I was able to help him convert that into a bike tour. So, you know, let's just think about all of this work that's been done and recognize that it shouldn't have a singular life, that it should have multiple lives, so that it's more than just a tool for historic tax credits or a designation that leads to a plaque. Yeah, I recognize some people just won't get it, and I'm at this point okay with it, but I just try and reinforce to people, I'm like, why are we doing preservation work? Okay, we're doing it. Most people say something along the lines of it has community benefits. I'm like, okay, Well, if we wanted to have community benefits, we need to make sure it connects to our whole community, which means we have to try a wide range of strategies, because not everybody is interested in engaging in one way. You know, some people may only come to virtual lectures and never show up in person, or some people may take that walking tour, but other people won't want to take that walking tour, you know? So how do we fill that gaps both through passive engagement, active engagement, and otherwise? And like I said, not everything's been a home run. I did this slate roof workshop. I was so excited for it. I got a bunch of slate roofers lined up who were donating slate. They came with their materials, and the goal was that everybody would learn how to cut slate that day, and you could make coasters or trivets. You know, you could create a household item, because I kept seeing these slate home goods in like the little shops around town, and I was like, oh, if that costs $20, I can teach somebody how to make it for $0. Nobody showed up.
Oh,
Nobody.
No.
So it's just me and a bunch of slate roofers hanging out for an afternoon. So, you know, what did I learn from that? Okay. In that case, I would say my marketing was not great. I was marketing it to a audience of homeowners who don't do much DIY. They typically just outsource things. They weren't really interested in the process. They just knew the commission required them to keep their slate roof. So, you know, I think that if I'd marketed it to a different audience, maybe I could have found a way to make it work. But again, lessons learned. I got some good holiday gifts out of it.
well, I'm impressed that you had multiple slate roofers to pull together.
We have a higher concentration of slate roofs in Ohio than you may expect. Got a lot of slate from Pennsylvania here.
Good question, Stacy. Sarah, if people ask you, why is historic preservation important in 2021? How do you answer that?
To me, it's that quote, how will you know it's us without the past? I think that especially this past year, we have seen again and again the disconnect from people and the past. Our local histories, our national histories, the legislation that has protected people from discrimination. And I think a lot of people, through shortcomings in our educational systems, but also in our I will say our historic site engagement and our other strategies. I think that preservation is important because we have to connect past to present, because the past is still impacting us today. And when I did these voting rights workshops, for example, a lot of people had no clue that it was up until the 1970s when Indigenous people were still unable to vote in many states. So I feel like we just really have to do it right for preservation, whether it's for creating empathetic communities. I believe that preservation can be a tool for cultivating empathetic communities, or when we look around and discuss climate and the amount of building materials that go into our landfills. To me, we need preservation today for not just the emotional health of our communities, but the physical health. And preservation, a horrible Houston example. I don't mean to talk so much negative on Houston. It's a nice place worth visiting. But, you know, Houston and other Texas communities have really been showcasing some health issues, you know, from their socioeconomic divides in their community and where the landfills are. And it's not, you know, a story relegated just to Houston. But when we look at historic communities, and okay, there's a historic Black community in Houston that's built right next to a landfill, and they're showing extra health issues in their youth, you know, that's something that we really need to be considering. And it's historic community that was there. Why did people choose to plan there? It's like urban renewal 2.0. It's happening still in 2021.
Right. So true. Any other questions from the audience?
Well, if you're looking for a group that I think does some really interesting work, and I'll put their name in the chat, the Decay Doubles in Gary, Indiana. They started out as a grassroots effort. None of them have preservation backgrounds. They were just a group of friends that like to get together to photograph decaying buildings in Gary, Indiana. And then along their journeys, as urban explorers, they realized they wanted to preserve Gary's past. So they actually purchased for something ridiculous, like $10, the old Union Station from the city. And this group has been actively working for a number of years where they have done cleanup, stabilization. It's currently mothballed, but they've been working with college groups to come up with potential concepts, and they've been fundraising. And while you can't go in the building currently, it's boarded up with beautiful art on the plywood windows, and they do activities on the grounds like movie screenings and oversized games and things for all ages. It's really nice.
Yeah, were they a presenter in your conference last summer?
There was one person from there during the 10-minute talks. Yes, he talked about how he became a Decay Double. Which
I remember that. Your conference was really well done. I encourage everyone to check in on that this year. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. You know, it's going back to Stacy's question, right? Of like, well, do people take you seriously? Not always, but if I can just make somebody pause and consider a concept for 5 seconds, okay, success.
Well, and connecting to all these different groups and different activities and just thinking about our work in a totally different way.
And we really, I mentioned it a few times, but truly, a lot of us are underfunded, right? Our preservation nonprofits, we all need bigger budgets to achieve all the dreams that we have. But we can't do that if we keep pursuing the same buckets of cash, the same grants. We have to look beyond and consider different funding mechanisms, different friendships, which turn into funders, and consider that, because organizational growth requires organizational growth within our development areas.
Constant feeding and nurturing of all the people that we touch.
And like I said in the presentation as well, I have had clients, everything from universities and libraries to political action groups to preservation nonprofits and everything in between. Preservation, it's expansive. So we just need to try our best at reaching all those people, whether it's difficult conversations or fun activities and everything in between.
Well, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's really been wonderful to touch base with you and hear all of your work, and definitely look forward to the conference in July. Yes, and today is officially the first day it's open for registration.
Oh,
so
good.
You won't get the sneak peek before I even send it out to everyone. And I've shared my email. Never hesitate to reach out. Like I said, I know I dumped a lot of ideas on you all, but that's because there's just a lot of great examples out there. Yes. Thank you, Sarah. This was terrific. Thank you. And so this is the last session, the last program of our spring session. We'll be doing some more talks later in the summer. So if you have any suggestions of topics or speakers that you'd like us to invite to talking about preservation, and of course, remember always to please be a member of Preservation Connecticut, preservationct.org. We can't do our work without the support of our members. Thank you all so much. Bye-bye. Thanks, Sarah.
You, Sarah.
Thanks again for inviting me. Really appreciate it.
I really just love hearing all of the things that you do. You really do think outside the box.
I try my darndest. I try my darndest. Well, thanks so much. And never hesitate to reach out. And I know I'll be in touch with your staff about writing something for your newsletter. Yes, great. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye-bye.